Greetings and welcome, fellow adventurers. Hit the like button if you've ever been deep into a campaign, introduced your bad guy with grandeur, and then poof, they're gone. All due to your player's unpredictability. Ah, the joys of being a dungeon master. I'm DM Alan, and welcome back to the DM's table. I've been DMing for about 10 years now. I started with 3.5 edition and moved my way into 5th edition. And let me tell you, through those years, I've seen it all. Today, we're delving into the realm where narrative twists and character choices reign supreme. So buckle up, because we're about to explore the art of handling your antagonist's timely death. And trust me, you won't want to miss this. I'll be sharing some of my most cherished DM insights along the way. Before we plunge into the intricate details, subscribe, and then let's lay some groundwork. First off, we need to remember that antagonists are not always just people, and it's not always the villain. They serve as a catalyst for conflict. Sometimes your antagonist can be world-altering events or abstract forces, propelling your narrative into motion. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to speak as if the antagonist is a character. Now here's the really intriguing part. Losing your antagonist early is not necessarily a bad thing. It can lead to some of the best storytelling and some of your players' most cherished memories of the campaign. But whoa. Before we get into that, let's back up a little bit and lay out some practical steps that you can use in order to prepare for losing your antagonist early. So in order to do that, we need to journey into a place that not a lot of us get to, and that's preparing for the time of what now. What do I mean by that? I mean, we're trying to prepare for situations where, like, you lose your antagonist early, or the players go left when you mean for them to go right. Some of the biggest things that DMs need to remember is that players have no idea where this story is going. And just because you planned for the left door to be a fire pit, and you really wanted to do that fire pit, but they went right instead, it doesn't mean that you can't move that fire pit to the other room. We're going to use that exact same concept with antagonists. In order to do this, though, we need to craft plot points or story beats that don't rely on characters. Think of your story beats as the backbone of your story. You want to make sure that it's really strong and able to handle anything that you throw at it. Well, if you tie a character to that backbone, that's going to make it much more rigid. It's going to make it more fragile. And you're not going to be able to recover as easily if you're counting on this antagonist to live for so long. Separating the characters from the plot beats also removes the so-called plot armor. It's where your characters can't die because the story relies on them too heavily. We see this in TV, and it forces us to suspend disbelief in moments of desperation. We also see this in literature, where your main character is telling the story from a future perspective, or in the past tense. At some point in the story, you're going to go, oh my gosh, are they going to die? Wait, no, because they're telling the story. So let's remove all of that. No plot armor. Remove your characters from your story beats where you can, and take solace in the wise words of Qui-Gon Jinn.
There's always a bigger fish.
These bigger fish can be bigger antagonists. Remember, most of them are not going to care about what's going on currently in the plot. But as soon as the current antagonist is taken out, all of a sudden these bigger antagonists are going to feel the ripples, and they're going to start to take notice. So start thinking instead about who the bigger fish is. Think about who would care if your current bad guy dies. Would they care in a good way? Would they care in a bad way? Why would they care? A lot of times in history, we see these big bad people are taken out, and it creates a power vacuum. So, set up a situation where a power vacuum makes sense. This creates a safety net for you as a storyteller, and allows you a little bit more freedom to introduce your bad guy and really whomp on your players without the fear of potentially losing your bad guy. Because if your bad guy dies, so what? Who cares? Oh no, it's gonna create good storytelling and memorable moments. If you've separated your bad guy from your story like this, or created safety nets for yourself, it's not gonna matter as much if you lose your bad guy early. Just make sure that when they go, they leave a lasting impression on the world. Enough that maybe the next villain feels like they can now step in. And this allows your players to feel as if they're creating a impact on the world. Think of The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy killed the Wicked Witch of the East. The Wicked Witch of the West all of a sudden had motive to care about what was happening and who this Dorothy was. Alright, now it's time to weave in those subplots. This dovetails nicely into the whole concept of there's always a bigger fish. Yet, it's versatile in its own right. When your bad guy dies, you're forced to transition your story. So make sure that you have subplots in the wings waiting just in case. Some of these subplots can be set up by laying yourself some hooks. When DMs are talking about leads or story hooks or plot hooks, they're talking about setting up something where you're making mention of like events that your characters are not really necessarily interested in yet, or really don't have the time to tackle, or can't tackle because they don't have enough information. Let's use an example. Let's say your characters are in a town. Their main focus is whatever main plot you've got, right? Well, you can lay down some dialogue in there when they're talking to NPCs, or when they're walking through town. Like, have you heard of the children that are missing? Yeah. Nobody knows where they're going. They just disappear. That's all you need. You don't need anything else. And in fact, you don't need to flesh that out. If the characters chase it, just give them a dead end. Say the story stops here. The trail goes cold. Cold cases are common, especially in the traditional D&D setting. You can figure out creative ways in order to keep them from continuing forward. But later, let's say your characters during a first meeting of a very important antagonist just off and kill the guy. Who knows why, but someone's bound to cast Fireball. Well, this is super easy for us to kind of walk back now, because now we get to explore in the what happens next. So things like your characters might want to party and revel with the locals, especially if your bad guy was outwardly bad, like the Wicked Witch of the West, right? Everybody was happy when she died. There was revels. So, what do you do after that, though? Your party might want to do a victory lap and go do a dungeon, or something like that. That's when you bring in the subplot. So let's use our example. After the party has had their revels and had their fun, you then lay out a situation where an NPC can approach them and say, hey, I've got a lead on these missing children. Make sure now that you've bought yourself enough time to flesh this information out. Maybe this leads to a cave where the children have gone missing, and that cave leads to a secret lair. That secret lair could belong to your deceased bad guy. This is where you can introduce story and do story dumps for characters through the exploration of the world. They can find notes, they can find ledgers implicating those in the gentry, they can find all sorts of evidence and information that will allow them to progress in the story. And then maybe the players find the classic, the bad guy was doing bad things to hold back this greater evil. You know what I'm getting at. You can introduce a new evil, you can introduce a new story concept for them to start to dive into. This is how subplots can help you transition your plot. This allows your players to grapple with their failures, their successes, and what the heck is coming next. Now let's step back to that crucial moment where we realize that our antagonist's time is drawing to a close. Ultimately, this is the role of the antagonist. You want to transition your antagonist from a villainous role to something more. A lot of times that means your antagonist's death, but that doesn't always have to be the case. Sometimes you can transition them into a good guy. Think of the Green Ranger, for instance. Moving the Green Ranger to the White Ranger and becoming a good guy. Here you have an opportunity to craft a scene that is absolutely epic, whether or not this was the intended time to bid your bad guy farewell. The scene can encompass various elements like roleplay and thrilling battles. This can profoundly impact the area in which the scene unfolds. So what you're going to want to do is reflect on the scale of your events, then accentuate the impact of these events in the appropriate scale, whether it's local, regional, world level, cosmic level, whatever it may be. Make sure that you're getting the ripple in the story that you're looking for. And this is a big one. We as DMs need to remember not to cast blame. It doesn't matter if you're blaming yourself or if you're blaming the players. We don't need to cast the blame. Nobody has ruined the story. Instead, we've enriched the story by adding in twists that nobody could have predicted, potentially kindling a fervor for exploration and more in-depth roleplay. This is what we want. As DMs, we want to have this impact. So embrace this, regardless of if it wasn't planned. Last but not least, careful pacing is your ally. Whether you expected it or not, your story is transitioning now. So, in this time, we need to introduce new antagonists, potentially new plot arcs, and we need to raise the stakes in order to keep the attention of our players and ourselves. We can assist in careful pacing by not revealing too much. Revealing too much can actually ruin the fun for your players. I've done this many times, where I've shown frustration or told a little bit about a backstory that I shouldn't have outside of game. Oh, I shouldn't have attacked the person? I've ruined the game. When we reveal too much as DMs, we allow our players to take on that burden of blame, even though we might not want them to. It doesn't mean that they won't do it. I've had many players in the past who felt bad because they've ruined the campaign, because maybe they killed something they weren't supposed to, or somebody that they weren't supposed to. I've had plenty of players in the past that I've let down by showing too much, and this allowed them to blame themselves. Particularly, you can see this in Roll with Advantage. When Kinian does some of the most out-of-the-box ideas, I've had to roll with the punches, and I love doing it. But sometimes I would make mention away from the table, just talking about the game, and Dan, the player, would feel bad because he didn't realize the impact that his actions had brought upon the world. He felt like he ruined the story or marred it in some way, made it unenjoyable for me or the other people at the table. And he didn't. He absolutely didn't. What did Dan do? He added life and realism to the game. He gave it an extra quality, one that allowed the game to breathe on its own, gave it life. So, do yourself and your players a service. Don't reveal too much, or anything at all, about what's going on behind the DM screen. Dungeon Masters, the essence of our craft is to embrace the unexpected. Your narrative may take twists or turns during the campaign, but your ingenuity is going to allow you to thrive in such moments. Flexibility and spontaneity are going to be your trusted companions. And keep in mind that a campaign's voyage is a journey of evolution. The conclusion of an antagonist is going to change your story in exciting and eventful ways. So fellow DMs, harness your storytelling prowess and let the dice weave their tales. If this discourse has proven insightful, please consider joining our Patreon community over at patreon.com/DMsTable. And as always, you can check out more information about the DM's Table at dmstable.com. We have an Etsy. Go check out the links down below. Need a little more DM fuel? Maybe go check out our review on The Monsters Know What They're Doing, or our other review on Grimtooth's Traps. That one's awfully devious. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Thank you so much for the support, and happy gaming.